So I want to talk a little bit about the student debt situation. You guys, Joe Biden saying to the Hispanic caucus in Congress that that he is like considering forgiving some portion of student debt for every borrower. His last promise on the campaign, for what it's worth, he made a number of different claims on student debt, but the last thing he promised was $10,000 per borrower. That would be grossly inadequate, but it would certainly be something. So we'll see if he's going to follow through on that. They've spent over a year at this point twiddling their thumbs and claiming that they are not sure if they have the legal authority to do that via executive action. It's obvious that they do have that authority, as we've covered a number of times, and other progressive outlets have too. But he apparently is looking at the polls for this November and starting to realize, oh, fuck, young voters and progressives are just not going to turn out. And why would they when we have reneged on virtually all of our promises? So he's starting to panic a little bit. And apparently this is his response. Now, it obviously won't be enough. It might help them a little bit. But here's my argument, you guys. I think this is more about saving face than it is about saving the Democrats in November. I think that ship has largely sailed. I think what this is about is when the Democrats are inevitably criticized from all over for opening the door to Republicans this November and for not doing what they promised, they're going to get it from everyone, you guys. Like, even the partisan Democrats are going to be upset, like, hey, you opened the door for Republicans. And then you get the progressives hitting them from the left. I think this would be an excuse or something that Joe Biden can say in response to that. No, look, I did the student debt thing. See, it didn't even work. You progressives don't know what you're talking about. I think it's a face-saving exercise. I don't think that they actually think they have a shot in November. But in any case, obviously, it's better than nothing. Like, I'd rather have it happen than not happen for the sake of the borrowers out there. Millions, 40-some million borrowers in this country that would see some relief from that. So I'm going to show you guys a clip here. This is Briahna Joy Gray on Rising. She did her monologue the other day on the student debt situation. I think she has some very insightful things to say about the narrative and how both sides have sort of presented their arguments here and what kind of fights have broken out. I will say this is one of the clips I mentioned to start the show off, where in the middle, she has a little bit of a piece where she sort of frames it as taxpayer dollars would be paying for this debt relief. And I absolutely love Briahna. I think she's fantastic. I respect her. She's one of the best people in this industry, one of the best commentators out there. But I cannot stand it when I see progressives do that, you guys. It's handing home field advantage to your opponent to talk about this stuff in those terms. It's not taxpayer dollars that are paying for any federal spending. The spending has to come first by definition, and the taxes are simply an elimination of dollars. So, this only ever comes up on progressive issues. You never hear how are you going to pay for it when it's about military spending or R&D checks for corporations or gigantic corporate tax breaks or any of that stuff. There's never any, oh God, the deficit, when that's the policy being discussed. But as soon as we want to provide housing to people or jobs to people or education to people or healthcare to people, then it's, oh dear Lord, the budget, right? So I just want to implore progressives out there not to give away your home field advantage by talking about this stuff as though it's tax to spend, because it's functionally inaccurate, and it also is rhetorically, strategically not the smartest thing to do. You're helping your opponent out. The only argument that conservatives have, you guys, they can't argue the actual policy. The only argument they have is, oh, but it's going to run up the deficit. They fearmonger incoherently about debts and deficits. It's the only argument they have that lands whatsoever. So we have to stop playing right into their hand by using that language. We just have to stop doing it. Okay. So anyway, that little tangent aside, the outside of that middle piece where she kind of frames it like we should tax the rich to pay for it, the rest of this is absolutely fantastic, and I think she's spot on. But we are going to come back and discuss the whole sort of thing, right? And why I think this rhetoric is so important. But this is Briahna Joy Gray dismantling the conservative arguments against student loan forgiveness, and discussing sort of how the fights seem to have broken out. We'll watch this and then come back and discuss.
Briahna, what's on your radar?
Well, Robbie, student debt cancellation has been the focus of a great deal of attention recently because it is one of a short list of action items Biden can actually implement without soliciting votes from Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. It's not because it's the program that helps the neediest. It's not even the way I'd address the student loan crisis if I had my druthers. We need to address the cost of college by making public colleges and universities tuition free. And heck, if I had my way, we'd also be offering retroactive payments to folks who've paid off their debts. But I don't run the world, unfortunately, and Biden is limited to doing what he can do using executive authority, which means student debt cancellation. Because over 90% of student debt is held by the federal government, he can use the same authority, which has enabled him and Trump to pause student debt, to cancel it outright. Over 44 million Americans have student debt, including a growing number of seniors, people exploited by for-profit colleges, and folks with debt from vocational degrees. Republicans and corporate Democrats have limited Biden's ability to provide relief to other populations in other ways. Say you're someone who would prefer to see aid go into families. I might agree. But with $225 billion in child care canceled, $225 billion in paid family leave canceled, and $200 billion in universal pre-K all killed, along with the human infrastructure bill, the best we can do for families is make sure that parents in those families aren't still paying their loans off as they save for their children's education. Now, the news this week is that it seemed for a second that Biden was actually coming around on this. After months of pretending he didn't have the authority to do what he was already doing, this week it was reported that Biden told the Congressional Hispanic Caucus that he's considering significant student debt cancellation, leading some to hope that not only was Biden finally getting serious about his campaign promise to cancel at least $10,000 of debt for everyone, but that he might actually cancel $50,000 or more. Now, his administration is already walking this back, but not soon enough to prevent all of the most corrupt big bank shills on Twitter from squealing like stuck pigs all day yesterday. Let's run through some of the worst takes, shall we? First up, founder of one of the world's leading private equity firms, 2012 presidential hopeful, and owner of an elevator for his cars, a real man of the people, Mitt Romney. Romney trended on Twitter yesterday for tweeting, quote, "Desperate polls call for desperate measures. Dems consider forgiving trillions in student loans. Other bribe suggestions? Forgive auto loans, forgive credit card debt, forgive mortgages, and put a wealth tax on the super rich to pay for it all? What could possibly go wrong?" What could go wrong? Not much from my perspective. Sounds like a good plan. Now, thoroughly dissecting everything wrong with this tweet would make this script longer than Grey's Anatomy, but let's just start with the obvious. Everything he describes here is good and should happen. Making good things happen for working people is not a bribe. That's just good politics. So, for example, credit card companies have been notoriously exploitative, and progressives like Bernie Sanders and AOC have proposed legislation to keep banks, like the ones Romney served when he was making his millions, from exploiting consumers with hidden fees and usurious interest rates, which average a whopping 17.71%. Mitt Romney is the kind of person who sees bailing out consumers as a problem, even while he's mum on the federal bailouts he's received. He tut-tuts helping students who can deduct a maximum of $2,000 of student loan interest from their taxes, and only then if you make under $60,000 a year, even while he can deduct the full interest on his $1 million home. It's good, apparently, when the laws are designed to cut the rich a break, but God forbid working families get the same benefit. As rising guest Andrew Perez pointed out, if forgiving student debt was a massive giveaway to the rich, politicians would have done it already. This caller into C-SPAN this week put it perfectly.
But I have a different take on this.
Okay.
I think student loan debt should be wiped out for this reason. 2 years ago, they passed the Paycheck Protection Program in Congress. Businesses, which are people, they got billions of dollars. Then they used them billions of dollars, which wasn't their money, to pay their workforce for 6 months, and then it was extended. They turned around and forgave their debt, and they also let them keep all their profits. So why is it good enough for the business but not good enough for the student? That's my question. That's called fairness and equality.
Adam Minsky. Well said, sir. Well said. Now, to be clear, Romney's far from the only hypocrite in the bunch. Tom Cotton, self-styled working man's hero, asked, quote, "Why should a trucker who didn't go to college have to pay off a lawyer's student loan debt?" But if he knew anything about trucking, he'd know that student debt is a problem for truck drivers too. Did you know that the vocations corporate conservatives pretend to respect often require real training? and that training costs money. Did you know that the average truck driving school requires folks to pay between $3,000 and $7,000 up front? And that's not including housing, meals, and transportation. Cotton doesn't want to pay for truckers to get an education, so he's pretending that they will be paying for a lawyer's degree. But the reality is, of course, that nobody is paying in a traditional sense. What we're talking about is federally held debt being canceled. You know how no one is paying right now because of the student debt moratorium? Cancellation simply means that status quo is made permanent. And to the extent that anyone should pay to permanently fix the underlying problems with the system by making public education and vocational programs free, well, let's revisit one of the excellent suggestions from Romney's tweet: tax the rich. Remember, Elizabeth Warren's modest wealth tax involved a 2-cent tax on every dollar earned over $50 million in wealth. Just 2 cents on a dollar over 50 million. If a billionaire dropping $44 billion on an app doesn't suggest to you that a modest wealth tax is in order to make sure we have a well-educated populace that can, actually help build the Mars colony we're all dreaming about, I'm not sure what will. Now, finally, here's my favorite take, this time offered up by another faux populist, J.D. Vance, a man dripping with so much contempt for poor white people that even the great Glenn Close couldn't reform the movie adaptation of his life story. Now, according to Vance, forgiving student debt is a massive windfall to the rich, to the college educated, and most of all, the corrupt university administrators of America. Okay, now, if there were ever an argument to fund free public college and hobble private institutions like Yale, Vance's alma mater, this complete turd of bad logic Vance is dropping here is it. Now, I want you to really lean in, really listen to what I'm about to say. I think you'll get it intuitively. Rich people don't take out debt to go to college. Rich people don't have to. Think about it. Interest rates when I was going to law school were about 8%. Why on earth would anyone who could pay the sticker price for school, about $180,000 at the time, sign up for an interest rate that would have them pay over $80,000 more than the cost of tuition over the course of an average 10-year repayment period? And to be clear, most people take much longer than 10 years. Millions of Americans who happen not to have rich parents are paying more for their education than the kids whose parents can pay up front. Vance's argument ends up amounting to saying, I only think that rich kids should become doctors and lawyers. I only think rich kids should get a 4-year degree. And that's not the populist egalitarian argument he thinks it is. That's the argument of someone who got the benefit of a Yale education and wants to pull the ladder up behind him. That is an argument you should ignore. Now, Biden's latest remarks do seem to be a departure from what he said in the past, and I understand why folks are hopeful. But I am a student of Biden logic, and Biden historically subscribes to the school of reverse empathy, e.g., it was tough for me, so it should be tough for you too. During the campaign, in a move that I found to be shocking in its cruelty, he uses to see son's medical bills as a justification for why we shouldn't have Medicare for all. He is an expert in weaponized empathy, using the fact that he can relate to voters through shared tragedy to justify not doing all he could to help them. This is why student debt cancellation advocates should not let up now. This is the moment to put the pressure on. The fact that all of these corporate-funded politicians who suckle at the teat of big banks are squealing means activists, workers, students, and their parents have finally turned up the heat. Private loan servicers, banks, and others who are making a profit off of this regressive education tax are lobbying politicians hard to keep this corrupt system in place. And the government has an interest in keeping education and healthcare out of reach so it can continue to drive young people into the armed forces, not out of a sense of duty or patriotism, not because they believe we are fighting just wars, but because they don't know how else to get healthcare or to go to school. Tom Cotton and Romney are right. There is a class war afoot, but it's not being waged between lawyers and truckers. It's millionaire investment firm founders, come politicians, against you and your children's future.
I thought that was a pretty fantastic monologue with that one little tax dollar exception in the middle. And just to hit on that before we get into the rest of it, for those who don't know, you guys, it is, I said this before the clip, but it's, we are giving our opponents an advantage when we use their framing and their rhetoric in this way. So when we argue for progressive policies that would spend on poor and working class people, that would actually shift economic power towards poor and working class people, when we're talking about those policies, the arguments against them fall entirely short. So our opponents are forced into a corner where the only argument they have that works, despite it being incoherent and factually detached from reality, the only argument that they have is, well, but it's going to raise taxes, so you're going to be paying for other people's shit. And then they do the whole Red Scare thing, right? Government's going to take your toothbrush, right? You have to pay for everyone else's education through your hard-earned tax dollars, and they fearmonger about it that way. And again, that's factually detached from reality, as MMT shows us. It's incredibly disingenuous, because even if the tax to spend rhetoric was actually factually correct, any progressive tax system would not have poor people paying for rich people shit. So it's on so many different levels. It's insidious, right? It is odious. It is harmful to our movement, and we need to stop handing over home field advantage to our opponents by engaging in their framing and their rhetoric. And I would just beg Briahna Joy Gray. There's no chance in hell she's going to watch my live stream, but I would just beg Briahna Joy Gray, please, 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 please stop using that kind of framing. Call it public dollars. That's what it is, right? And all that it is decisions being made by Congress, who have the power of the purse granted to them in the Constitution. Okay. So they're simply making political decisions, what to spend on, what not to spend on. Budgets express priorities, okay? So when we give $33 billion in defense aid to Ukraine and refuse to cancel student debt or provide housing or healthcare or education to our own citizens, when we refuse to address the problems in our justice system, when we refuse to address the climate crisis that we've created, on and on and on, all of that is a political decision by Congress. So that's how we have to frame it. Why are you choosing not to help people domestically? Why are you choosing to allow people who tried to do the right thing and go get an education so they could get a good job and better society and provide for society and all this shit that we're taught growing up, right? The people who did what they were told they had to do to get along okay, and now they're drowning in debt. Why are we making that political choice? If we make that the discussion, then their only argument is the bitter thing, right? What Briahna was talking about there, the weaponized empathy, the inverse empathy, the I had to pay my debt off, so you should have to pay your the bitter, resentful political position of I don't think anyone should ever have it better than me, right? If you force them to actually make that the core of their argument here, they're going to get absolutely mollywopped. But when they get to sit back and prey on our economic misunderstandings and say your hard-earned tax dollars are going to go to this, then they win. So this is why we at RP, and I'll once again plug realprogressives.org for educational content on MMT. The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton is a wonderful primer into MMT if you're new to the concept. But this is why we are always talking about MMT, because it is so critically important to how all of these political discussions are framed and how we think of public policy and public spending, etc. Okay, so that's my quick little rant on that. Briahna, please, God, I absolutely love you. I think you do fantastic work. Please stop using the taxpayer rhetoric. This goes to a lot of progressive commentators who I largely agree with, who will on occasion use this kind of rhetoric. And we have a clip of Bernie doing it later here too. So, you know, I'm not trying to come down on anybody. I view these people as largely my allies, but I have to say something. I'm so tired of this rhetoric. It makes me want to pull my hair out. One of these weeks, I'm going to get up here and just be straight up bald, you guys, because I've seen too much taxpayer dollars. I'm going to fucking pull my hair out. Okay. Anyway, to get into the rest of the stuff where I think she was really spot on in her analysis of some of these conservative arguments in opposition to forgiving or canceling student debt. I put a tweet up about one of the things she was talking about, and I'm going to go ahead and oh, I'm sorry, I don't have my screen shared. I was unprepared today. Here we go. I just said, ever notice how the politicians and pundits who incessantly support cutting taxes for the rich and giving them handouts are the same politicians and pundits claiming student debt forgiveness is a handout to the rich? And she kind of touched on that rhetoric, right? The very same people who endlessly serve the billionaire class are suddenly like, well, why are you going to give a handout to the rich by canceling student debt? And to Briahna's point, the wealthy very seldom take out loans to go to college, you guys, because why would they want to pay interest on something when they could just like write a check for it to start with? So that argument is so incoherent and not rooted in reality, detached from reality. But they will try to make that argument anyway, despite how contradictory it is to most of their political beliefs and most of the things that they support, which are completely centered around serving the billionaire class. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to care about, oh, you're giving a handout to billionaires. I mean, give me a break. It's absolutely outrageous. It should reveal how clownish and unserious their positions are to start with, right? So, you know, I think she is spot on about the way that conservatives have responded to this, and it's kind of it harkens back to one of the things I was saying earlier, where if you actually make this about the politics here, if you actually have to sit here and discuss the policy, it's such a no-brainer, you guys. I mean, it's just like Medicare for all or tuition-free college. She also made a great point, and actually, let me sidetrack here for a minute because I really wanted to make a point to go down this path. One thing that I see a lot is when people do the bitter thing, I worked hard for years and paid off my loans. One of the responses I give is, well, I think you should be, reimbursed for that. I think this should be retroactive. I don't think we should just cancel currently outstanding loans. I think we should also cancel, like reimburse people for what they've had to pay go back however many years. This has been a serious problem, at least a couple decades, not more. So that's one response, right? No, you're not left out of this. I actually mean everybody should have access to a free education. And if you had to pay for it in the past, I think you should be reimbursed for it. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is, if your political position is entirely rooted in nobody should have it better than me, then what are we even doing here, you guys? Why do we even have politics? Why is someone like that even engaging in politics? If your whole thing is, I don't want the next generation to have it better than me, then what's the point? What are we all doing here? Right? Like, that's the whole core thing of the American dream, supposedly, right? The stories that we tell ourselves about America. Right? Well, next generation will have it better. Your kids will have it better than you if you work hard. That's what we tell ourselves. And yet these people have come out and just gone totally mask off and told on themselves when it comes to their positions. And no, I don't think anyone else should have it any easier than me. I think any suffering I had to endure, any hardship I had to endure, I think everyone else should have to endure it till the end of fucking eternity. Because otherwise I had to endure something that you didn't. Get off my lawn back in my day, right? It's just, that's how it comes off. But anyhow, I wanted to make the point that one of the things you can say to disarm that is, well, if I had my way, now Biden's not going to do this, but if I had my way, you'd be reimbursed. I'm not leaving you out of this. I don't care if you paid 20 years ago, had your loans paid off, you should be reimbursed. And I think that part is not often enough, inserted into the conversation. And by the way, the only thing that they could squawk about then is, well, but I'm getting reimbursed less than the people are getting then they'd be making our point for us that the price for college has gone through the roof over the last couple of decades, largely, by the way, thanks to people like Joe Biden, and the financial institutions who have stood to benefit from those costs going through the roofs, and the colleges, of course, who operate more like corporations nowadays than they do institutions of education. So anyhow, this has sparked kind of a shit show. Joe Biden, saying he's considering canceling or forgiving some portion of student debt. It has really sparked a shit show. And I also want to drive home. This is another really important point, you guys. So if this does happen, and again, I've made clear, whatever he does is going to be grossly inadequate. Even if it's $50K per, we should cancel all of it, reimburse everyone who's paid their loans, and we should make colleges and universities tuition free going forward. So even if he does 50, that will still be a conservative compromise by from my perspective. But it's very much worth pointing out, even though that's an inadequate policy, it's very much worth pointing out why he is doing it. It is not out of the goodness of his fucking heart, you guys. It's not because he actually believes it's the right policy. If either of those were true, he would have done it in his first week. We would have had this done almost a year and a half ago. if he actually was intent on doing this. What it demonstrates is that when progressives fall in line, they're comfortable. When we don't fall in line, it actually forces them to do, again, I don't want to overstate this, but it actually forces them to do something. Do you honestly think Joe Biden would be even talking about this if he wasn't looking at polls that looked absolutely disastrous for his party? No. If all of us progressives were falling in line in this moment, and he was looking at polls that said we're going to be just fine in November, or even we're going to do well in November, if his approval rating wasn't tanking, right? Like, if it didn't look like Trump was going to be fucking president again, like it does today, look like Trump is going to be president again, do you think Biden would be talking about this? No. His first year in 3-4 months it betrays any notion that he would be doing this otherwise, because he would have done it earlier. So I think it's worth noting that when progressives are told to get in line for Democrats, otherwise we won't get anything that we want, one thing we should point out is it is only and specifically when we don't get in line that they actually feel pressured to do a goddamn thing. So I think that element is also not often enough discussed. And to that point, huge shout out to Levi for the super chat. Thank you, Levi. Realprogressives.org for more information about us. Realprogressives.org/donate if you want to help us out, or you can leave a super chat like Levi just did, or a super sticker, I think it is. Huge thanks to anybody who can contribute. We really appreciate it. On the note of what I was just talking about, I want to show you guys this graphic that CNN put up. Okay, now you'll see here, it's basically Biden's report card. So they give him a green check next to American Rescue Plan and infrastructure. Now, those are stretches, okay? They're very much stretches, because neither of those programs was anywhere close to as robust as as Biden even said he was going to do, let alone anywhere close to as robust as we actually need. So both of those green check marks are a little bit suspect to me in a sense, right? They're a little bit of an exaggeration. But you see all these other issues, right? Has he addressed gun reform? Has he addressed immigration? No, in fact, immigration's a pretty extraordinary one. He said that day one, he would undo every executive order that Donald Trump put in place. You guys were over a year in, and a lot of Trump's policies at the border are still in place, okay? Has he expanded Medicare and Medicaid? No. In fact, he's worked to try to privatize them. Has he addressed the climate crisis? No. In fact, he has tried to lease more land for drilling and more permits for drilling throughout his first year and a half. Has he addressed criminal justice reform? No, not at all. In fact, he has provided more subsidies for police than Donald Trump was providing. Has he addressed voting rights? No, he has not. He likes to talk a lot about unions. Has he passed the PRO Act or used his bully pulpit to force the PRO Act through? No, he has not, right? Has he done anything tangibly to support? You could argue that the NLRB has been a little bit stronger under him than under Trump. Fine, that's fine. The officials might have been a little bit more willing to address illegal behavior than previous officials. But you guys, some of the funding has been gutted at the NLRB under Biden's watch, okay? Now, supposedly on his next budget, that's going to change. But you guys see the point. Oh, on issue after issue, he comes nowhere close to what he has promised. Nowhere fucking close to what he has promised. Okay. So that's also worth pointing out, is that when progressives actually hold out and actually, display our disdain for the party in their inaction, that is the only time that they feel forced to do even tepidly progressive things. And it totally, betrays the narrative that the mainstream likes to push and the establishment like to push, that you have to fall in line for Democrats or else you're not going to get anything that you want. It's a total misrepresentation of how power actually works in DC and in our political process, right? So I want to show you guys a thread here. This is a somewhat of a reverberating effect on the whole student debt situation that I don't think a lot of people talk about. Huge shout out, by the way, to Jules, our COO, who sent me this tweet thread and brought this to my attention. This is by Michelle Miller. I'm somewhat loath to get so personal, but I feel like I need to tell this story. My mother died in December of 2020 with what I believed at the time to be $40,000 in student loan debt. When I went to college, the deal my mom made with me was that we'd split the loan payback. I paid my portion back in about 10 years. We owed $15,000 each. I didn't know that she was never able to pay her portion back. I discovered she had the debt in 2019 when I had to help her out of a predatory refinancing scam. I asked if I could take over the loans. My very stubborn mother refused, so I let it go, but held some money back in my own savings in case she'd eventually let me help. Fall of 2022, things happened. She became ill quite suddenly due to the impacts of botched medical care 30 years prior, and the company she worked for started closing down departments. She was worried they'd shut down hers before she could retire the following year. She barely had enough money to make it through her retirement years. The difference between poverty and doing all right was the $400 monthly payment on those student loans. She told me it'd be okay because she was good at being broke. She was very sick the last week we spent together. I didn't know she was dying. I thought we were figuring out how to get some care for her and fix up the house. I asked if she'd let me take the loans over. She said it was a gift she'd be proud to give. She needed to do it herself. This is what we talked about the last week. My mom was alive. Loans. Student fucking loans. I am telling this story because every time I see someone say erasing debt is a gift to elites, I think about my mom, a woman who never saw her way out of the working class. After she died, my dear friend Dania and I went through her papers to deal with all the post-death practicalities no one ever talks about. I found her loan papers. She had lied to me about what she owed. It was $80,000, not $40,000, on about $15,000 of debt. The company forgave it immediately. This thread is going bananas, so I need to mute. And she goes on to plug something there. So you guys, like, I mean, how are you not touched by that story? Imagine, I mean, what do you even fucking say, you guys? Imagine how that woman felt as she knew she was dying. And she had tried to give this gift to her child, the gift of an education, at least partly help, right? Imagine how she felt knowing that her daughter was going to find out about that lie and potentially inherit that debt. Imagine that being your last week on earth or however long on earth. Imagine your last interactions with your loved ones having to be about debt and knowing that you have held this secret out of love for them that they're soon to find out. I mean, I just can't even, that's a tearjerker if I've ever seen one. How can you even describe how horrific that is, that we have created a society like that? So to those who would dare take the morally repugnant position that you don't think student loans should be forgiven, I would implore you to read that story and the millions of other similar stories, and perhaps reevaluate your position. So just really, really, you know, like I said, it's a tearjerker. That's that kind of a story, but it's indicative of how we treat the poor and working class in this country. We don't give a shit about them. We care about the financial institutions who get to prey upon them. We have a story later about Wall Street securities fraud, kind of along the same notes.